Hey, Clayton, why did they execute that guy for breaking the Sabbath in Numbers chapter 15? Let me read to you the passage that this question is referring to. It says this in Numbers 15, verse 32. While the Israelites were in the wilderness, a man was found gathering wood on the Sabbath day. Those who found him gathering wood brought him to Moses and Aaron and the whole assembly, and they kept him in custody because it was not clear what should be done to him. Then the Lord said to Moses, "The man must die. The whole assembly must stone him outside the camp." So the assembly took him outside the camp and stoned him to death as the Lord commanded Moses. Whew, that seems intense. Okay. We have actually already talked about this passage in brief. I interviewed Dr. Ben Noonan, my old college roommate, actually, about weird Old Testament laws a while back. We'll put a link in the description below. And we talked to him about the death penalty in the context of those laws. It's about 20 minutes into that episode. You can find him talking about that. And he mentions this passage a little bit throughout our conversation. But let's talk about this, okay? Why the question I want to ask before we dig into how is this okay is why we feel like this is wrong. Okay, this is important because what is going on when you read something like this and you go, "Oh, that doesn't seem right," is there is some instinct in you that it is provoking. And there have been actually sociologists or social psychologists that have studied where those impulses come from. And there was a researcher named Jonathan Haidt who has talked about kind of the moral taste buds that people work with. It's almost like the different categories of things that set off moral revulsion or moral reactions in people. And that's what's going on. We're reading this and we're having a moral reaction. We're saying, this doesn't seem right. And Jonathan Haidt, he says there's actually 6 categories of things that cause someone to do that. And each person has a greater or lesser sensitivity in each of these areas. And so different people react to different things, but they all kind of fall into one of these categories. And if you find someone who is more sensitive on one, they'll react stronger to things in that category than someone who is more sensitive in a different one. So here's what the 6 categories are. They are: is this harmful or helpful for someone? Does this harm someone? So you react if something, an activity hurts a person. Second, is this fair? If something seems unfair, you'll react and say, that doesn't seem like you're giving, equal, play to each person. Is it on the side of freedom or oppression, right? Like, does it take away someone's freedom or does it give them freedom, right? And if it's oppressive to people, it takes away their freedom. It feels like that's wrong, right? Is it authority or rebellion, right? So if there's a rightful authority that tells you to do something and you just defy that, well, that feels wrong, right? Is it loyalty or betrayal, right? If you have a group of people that you're committed to and you break with them and you undermine them, you betray them in some way, people will have a strong reaction and say, whoa, 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 you had a commitment to them and you broke your commitment or you undermined that, betrayed that. The 6th category is what you might call holiness or defilement, okay? This is when something is sacred, right? This is a precious thing. This is something that's special, and you've done something to disrespect and defile that thing. I have a reaction to that. Now, those 6 categories, you can probably recognize certain things in each of those categories that you might say is morally wrong. But here's what's interesting. Different people have different levels of sensitivity to each of those. And modern people in general are far more sensitive to the first 3. Is it harmful to someone? Is it unfair to someone? Does it oppress someone and take away their freedom? And we have a much stronger reaction, most modern people have, to the violations in those areas than in the last 3, okay? Is it a rebellion against an authority? Is it a betrayal of a group? Is it defiling something holy? And in the ancient world, they cared a lot about authority, loyalty, and holiness, where we care about harm, fairness, and freedom in ways that are have kind of different proportions. And so we often have the reverse moral instincts of ancient people. Okay, it's not that they didn't care about those things and not that we don't care about their things, but we usually rank them differently in terms of how much we respond to them or how much we think that they kind of provoke our moral instincts. And I think in this case, what's going on is our moral instincts about harm, unfairness, and freedom are being provoked, where the ancient people would have heard the other 3 being provoked of rebellion, betrayal, and holiness, okay? So even if you didn't follow that, let me try and explain this, okay? In Numbers 15, it's important to remember that God has already told the people The penalty for breaking the Sabbath is death. Now, that is a maximum penalty, not a minimum required penalty. It doesn't mean that just because someone broke the Sabbath, they had to be killed. That's why the people actually go to God and say, what do you want us to do in this situation? Because if God had already said, well, you got to kill him, it wouldn't have made sense for them to go inquire of God. But in this particular situation, they were saying, God, how strongly do you want us to punish this? Do we go all the way to the max to death, or do we do something less? And that implies not every situation required the death penalty. Each situation was unique, and we can understand the death penalty in some cases. Okay, now, some of us might say, I don't know if I'm okay with the death penalty at all, but it at least makes sense in cases like murder. A life for a life, that sort of thing, or protecting people from someone who would kill somebody. Maybe even adultery in some cases. You say it rises to a higher level of violation, and we say, I can understand why someone would say that's a capital offense. But the Sabbath, that part of it feels out of proportion, right? Like working on a day when you're supposed to rest doesn't feel near as significant, near as harmful as murder, right? So the moral revulsion of murder is because it's harmful to someone, right? But the moral revulsion to the Sabbath would only be because it was defiling something holy or disobeying an authority or something like that. And again, our sensitivity is stronger on this one than on that one. Okay, but let's talk about the Sabbath and try and understand why the Sabbath might get such a strong reaction in the Bible when we feel like, what's the big deal? Like, I know what we're supposed to do, but it's not that huge. He was gathering sticks, Okay, what does the Sabbath mean? Okay, first thing you need to know is the Sabbath is what we call a covenant sign. It was a symbol of the covenant that people had with God. The agreement, Dr. Sandra Richter talks about this as a treaty with God, a national alliance. Like God and the people of Israel have a treaty together. It's like Israel has become allies with God. Or if you switch the metaphor, it's like a wedding, right? Like there are certain symbols of the commitment that have been made between the husband, God, and the bride, Israel. And so Sabbath is one of those symbols. So Sabbath is like a wedding ring, right? This is not my marriage, but it is a symbol of my marriage. And the way I treat this ring could be an indication of what I actually think about my marriage. And so the way you treat Sabbath might actually show something about what you think about this covenant, this agreement, this marriage with God. Okay, let's just start with something really simple that might get you to this place. Okay. Let's say you are married and you have a weekly date night with your spouse. And every week, you always know it's coming up. It's every Tuesday night. You're gonna have the date night, and you're both gonna show up after work at the restaurant, and you're gonna spend quality time together. And it's already pre-planned. You both know that it's there, and it's something meaningful for you. It means something in your relationship. Now, let's say you missed date night one time. You just forgot. Now, would that be a serious violation? Well, it'd be something. You'd probably have a conversation about it, and you might, there might be some tension in your relationship, but it'd be more understandable, right? How could you forget something important like date night, right? Like that might hurt, or that might require some mending, but you can understand people forget things. So that might not be a big deal. That's like violating the Sabbath accidentally or something like that. But what if it was deliberate? What if you missed date night because you didn't want to be together, right? Like you knew it was date night. You didn't forget, but you deliberately decided not to show up. Your spouse is going to take that to mean something very different than a slip up, right? It's going to be a sign. It's going to be a symbol. It's a statement about what you think about the relationship. What if it was more like this? What if you had scheduled, and I actually know a couple that does this, every single year, they renew their marriage vows. They get together and they recommit, they re-say their vows and renew them together. What if on the day when you were supposed to renew your marriage vows, you didn't show up? That's a big deal, right? Like that might not just be a conversation that you got to have. That might threaten the relationship. That might be the sort of thing that you start saying, wait a minute, do you still want to be together? Right? Or let's switch the metaphor. Let's say instead of a marriage covenant, you're talking about an alliance, like a political alliance. And let's say you're supposed to have a summit between a small country, Israel, and the king of a large empire that has taken them under the wing. And between these two countries, the small country doesn't show up to the summit. Right? There's supposed to be this summit, this meeting to talk about their alliance, to talk about their treaty, to talk about their covenant. and the small country doesn't show up, what do you think the big country thinks? What do you think the king of that great empire thinks about this little, vassal state that is saying, I'm not going to show up to the treaty meeting? Well, guess what? There's going to be some consequences of that. So when we see this man picking up sticks, you need to think, this is not a guy trying to catch up on some chores in his free time. Like he just ran out of time on Friday, so he did it on Saturday. No, he is defying a divine treaty. He is breaking one part of the alliance that Israel has with God. He is doing something deliberate that is a symbol of breaking that covenant. Because it's been given that, you might say, what's the big deal about that? Well, once the symbol has been given that significance, if you violate it, it has significance, right? Because you're doing it not just to any old action, but to a symbol of the treaty, the covenant that you have with God. Okay, here's another thing that Sabbath means. Sabbath is actually part of kind of the creation rhythm, okay? So if you read the very first chapter of the Bible, Sabbath is part of the story of creation, right? 6 days God makes the world, on the seventh he rested. And so to participate in Sabbath is to participate in God's ideal, the creational rhythm that he built into the fabric of the universe. And doing so is actually a sign of trust and dependence on God. See, when a god would finish making the world in the ancient world, in the ancient stories, they would go to their temple and they would rest, not because they were sleeping, but because they were sitting on their throne. They would rest on their thrones. They're saying, I'm the king of the world. And so God resting on the seventh day is a way of saying, I'm king of the world. I'm upholding the world. I'm the one who made this and provided for this. And so on this day, you will rest and trust me in my reign. Here's another way of thinking about it. It's a little bit like the trees in the Garden of Eden, okay? One of the trees was the tree of life. It symbolized that we draw our life from God. We are utterly dependent on God. And when we are dependent on God, we have fullness of life. The other one was a tree that symbolized, I'm going to make my own rules. I'm going to assert that I'm in charge of my life. I'm going to be the one who decides good and evil. I'm going to be my own God. One is a tree of dependence, and one is a tree of independence. I'm going to trust in God. I'm going to be my own God. Guess what? Sabbath is the same way. Sabbath is a way of saying, I stop one day a week because I know that I draw all my life from God. God as the creator sits on his throne. And so one day a week, I acknowledge that everything I have comes from him, not from my own labor. But to work on the Sabbath is to insist, I direct my life. I provide for my needs. I am the one who's in control, and I am the one who does for me what God claims to do. I provide it, I run it. And so in some ways, to knowingly defy the Sabbath is to say, I don't want to eat from the tree of life. I want to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's a way of saying, I want to refuse to embrace the Edenic ideal, the fullness of life that God is offering, and I am going to live independently of him rather in dependence on him. And so for this man to do that, it's a way of saying, I don't need you to be in charge of me. I'm gonna say what I think is right and wrong, not trust you. Here's another thing that the Sabbath means, that the Sabbath is a communal practice. Okay, you got to remember, this is more than just an individual thing. This man is doing something very, very public, and that's very clear in the passage. He is doing something that people see, and he knows the consequences, right? Like God has already told them in his command. He's already taught them through their experience of getting manna every day, and the manna stops on the Sabbath, and they've been told, don't go out and try and collect manna on the Sabbath day, right? So Israel knows this. This is not a slip up. It's not something that they were ignorant of. So this man is deliberately doing something in public that everybody knows is a violation. Everybody else is doing something different, and he is deliberately doing this. And so you got to remember that there's a distinction in the law between sins that are unintentional and sins that are defiant, what are called high-handed sins. And if you are reading in verse 27 of this chapter, what chapter are we in? Chapter 15. There's actually a distinction between unintentional and intentional sins. And this is clearly an intentional sin. And intentional sins, what they do is they pull on the thread of the community fabric. When everybody else is doing what's right and one person says, I'm going to do whatever I think I want to do, it's pulling a little thread. And that thread of rebellion, that thread that demonstrates, I don't actually think that God is the one who's in charge. I'm going to do what I want. It starts to pull and pull and pull. And other people are affected by that rebellion. Other people get boldness to start doing high-handed things. Other people say, well, how big of a deal is it? And that thread starts to unravel the fabric of the faithful community. This is actually something that comes up in other parts of the Bible. In the book of Acts, there's a story of a man and a woman named Ananias and Sapphira who do something similar. I won't tell the whole story, but they lie before the people and publicly do something that violates what God is saying. And God executes them for that. In the New Testament, I know we think that this is an Old Testament thing. God's the same God in the New Testament. He says, no, if you're going to high-handedly do this thing that pulls on the fabric of the community and makes them think that they can do something unfaithful before me, I've got to do something about this. Now, it is worth noting that there is no death penalty in the New Testament. The church doesn't execute people for these things. All the places where these defiant sins are talked about in the New Testament, the consequence is not execution like it was in the government of Israel, but in the church, it is to be put under church discipline, to be either removed from the church or removed from privileges in the church. And so that's where that gets expressed. This is not something where people are expected to execute for these sorts of things, but it doesn't mean that the sins aren't serious and need to be dealt with. And also, if you think about the rest of the book of Numbers, how do the rebellions against God begin? Well, it's somebody who starts by saying, you know what, I don't think we got to do that sort of thing. And it spreads and it spreads and it spreads. And it becomes a real problem. If you're reading Numbers, you realize you've got to deal with this when it comes up early rather than let it get big because it affects the whole community. Now let's back up again. We are modern people, which means this sort of thing feels very unnatural to us. We assume that personal judgment is supreme. We think that freedom is the most important of those values, right? If you oppress my freedom, if you take away my freedom, that's the thing that gets the most provocation from me. And if I'm not doing something that harms somebody directly, then I don't know why you're telling me I can't do it. And that is our instinct. That's where our gut level things is. Our individuality is prized over loyalty to the community or a submission to authority. We look at those things that if you get in the way of my thing, then your authority or your community, it shouldn't impose on me. So our instincts are upside down compared to how the ancient people and the world of the Bible thought about those things. We think of God as existing to enrich my life, not run my life. And so when it starts that seems like God is asking us to do something we wouldn't otherwise want to do, we start to bristle and say, why would he do that? And it's important for us to recognize that God calls us to be a holy and righteous people based on his standards, and he actually means it. And this is one of those stories, even though it's uncomfortable, I'm not saying it should be easy, but it challenges us on exactly that point. Thanks for listening. If you've got your own questions, email questions@BibleSavvy.com. Like and subscribe to catch our regular episodes every Monday on the Bible Savvy Podcast.